Welcome to another episode of the Sports Clinic. I'm your host, Sadi Raza, and with me today is the Swedish Rumble. He runs a very popular Twitter feed on business of sports with a focus on Manchester United, which has, of course, been in the domain of sports law, business law of the past year, once the Glazers announced last November that they were planning a strategic analysis of the club, looking for outside funding slash a potential sale. It's been about 10 months now, and we're still no closer to a sale or a investment. But we're going to talk about Manchester United mostly off the field. I think we'll stay away from the on the field stuff. There's enough people who do that. So welcome. How are you?
I'm fine. A bit upset after today's game, but that's what it is.
So how did you get into sports law, business law, and this interest of, obviously you're a fan, but looking at the nitty-gritty of basically this takeover? Because you tweet actively with some regularity about it. How did you get into it?
And it's actually kind of a very strange background and reason for that, because about 3 years ago, I'm a lawyer. I work a lot at a business law firm. I'm a partner and work with public M&A. And when doing so, you don't have much time for anything else. But about 3 years ago, my son unfortunately got sick in cancer, bone cancer. So the last 3 years, I've spent a lot of time in hospital rooms with him. And he is 15, and his biggest interest is football and Manchester United, just like me. So we basically go at it 24/7 when we are at the hospital, and when I'm not working, I need something to do. So right now it's a lot of Twitter. I still work, but mostly maintaining client relationships and so forth. But it's been in everything that's kind of turning everything upside down with this sickness and so forth. It's been, if nothing else, a great distraction with United, of which I'm a lifelong fan, because so much have happened. Not only do we have the takeover, we have FFP and everything starting to really impact the game. So it's been exciting times.
Why don't you recap for us the current stage, sort of as to where you think we are in the takeover, where you think the Glazers are, and then we'll talk about where you think we go. But where do you think these 10, 11 months have led us to? If you want to sort of give us a chronology of where you think we started and the path that the Glazers and the Rain Group have gone down, and sort of recap for us, just so listeners who may not have the background that you have or the knowledge that you have can get up to speed.
So last year, the Glazers announced that they were exploring strategic options, and that's a common press release for a listed company, and it basically means that you will at least consider selling the company, or if it's a business in any other area, it might be that they are divesting a subsidiary or something like that. But in this case, of course, everyone assumed that they would sell, and I'm fairly certain that that's been their primary objective, because I don't really think the options for them to divest a minority really would be attractive financially. But since then, a lot has happened, of course. Last year was tough in itself financially, and anyone working in the M&A market knows that it's been tough for people to get deals done. Interest rates have gone up. There is a recession, at least in big parts of the economy, at least here in Europe, and under those circumstances, it's hard to get the transaction done. And at the same time, the club performed, I think, better than anyone really expected last season. So that improved the club's financial position pretty much. And as we know, the club was in a bit of a bind this summer, couldn't buy that many players, and that was despite qualifying for the Champions League. So I think that our good season last year kind of bought the Glazers a bit more time. That's my analysis. If we had struggled a lot last season, I think that we couldn't have improved the team this summer. Instead, perhaps we would have needed to sell players just to get by. And now they saw that we were moving in the right direction, and it should look better coming years. And at the same time, the interest from prospective buyers haven't perhaps been as good as the Rain Group hoped. So we hear a lot of numbers discussed, 6 billion and so forth. But ultimately, what this bids means is that if someone is willing to buy Manchester United for a 5 billion valuation, it means that the Glazers get 2.9 billion. Basically because the 5 billion valuation number mentioned is in business language for the enterprise value, and so you remove the debt from that number, and the Glazers only own 69% of the clubs, so that
so let's just touch on that just to recap for our listeners, that Malcolm Glazer basically structured the club in such a way that he gave each of the 6 kids close to equal ownership. And then a few years ago, the Glazers divested about 31% of the club onto the New York Stock Exchange, whereby now the 6 Glazers own 69% of the club, and the other 31% is owned by various folks on the New York Stock Exchange. Unlike most organizations, those shares that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange are not what we call pari passu shares. They're not equivalent. They have 1/10 the voting rights that the Glazers do. And so although they're financial shares, they don't have, there's no real power in the boardroom behind those shares.
Okay.
And that sort of leads itself to not necessarily difficulty, but complexities when it comes to completing the deal. But go on. I just wanted to sort of give that recap.
It's good that you point that out, and it's to even go further. Malcolm or his children, after taking over the club, incorporated a new parent company on the Cayman Islands. So it's actually the company on the Cayman Islands that have issued shares that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And on the Cayman Island, the reason you go there to incorporate is, of course, surely for tax reasons, but also because they have very friendly, majority-friendly rules. So, and that's also directly impacting this transaction, because it's very questionable what rights the minority owners have. They have absolutely have financial rights. Like you point out, they have a right to receive dividend, but if the club doesn't pay dividend, they don't have much rights besides that. But in any event, I think everyone expected something to this process to conclude before the summer, at least. And I think the reason it haven't is simply because the Glazers haven't received a bid that they have found to be attractive enough. And
so let's talk about that. The most expensive sports franchise, and I know football fans it's anathema to say franchise when it comes to Manchester United. We like to use the word club, but let's just go with franchise since we're talking about business and sports. The most expensive sports franchise at the time that the club was put up for sale was the Denver Broncos, and an NFL team. which was about almost £4.75 billion. That was then superseded by the Washington Commanders, which was close to right around £5.5 billion. But you have to understand also the Washington Commanders are a marquee team that also play in the same division as the Dallas Cowboys, and so there is and play in a marquee city in DC, and so there is sort of a added benefit to owning that franchise. It's a historic franchise. But I always felt as NFL owners, and the Glazers own the Tampa Bay Bucks, they would want to break the record for a sale of a sports team. And so you were always looking at least $6 billion US, which, when you think about it, isn't that much for a team as iconic as Manchester United. Because when you think of, and I tweeted this back about a year ago, when you think about big football teams, it's really Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Manchester United. And the first two are never going to be up for sale. They're just not.
Members owned, so
correct. So this is almost like a masterpiece, a piece of collection that is up for sale and a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think that's also why a lot of people felt that the 9-2 Foundation would win, because historically the Qataris, especially when it comes to use the art analogy, have been very ambitious in collecting art. They have a wonderful art museum right there in Doha. They have one of the best art collections in the world, and this would be another piece for them, because the enterprise value as a business, Manchester United, is not worth close to $6 billion. They have debts of about close to $1 billion. This is US dollars. They have a stadium that is at least 25 years behind the times when you talk about modern football, certainly NFL stadiums. I was at Old Trafford in December of 2022, and I was struck with, although it is a wonderful, beautiful stadium, it's a great place to watch a football game. This is me as a fan speaking. From a facilities, from a modernity perspective, this is a stadium that is well behind the times. You look at the cost of improving the stadium, the infrastructure, the training center, and then basically bringing a very antiquated way of running the football program, so to speak, up to the level of, say, a Manchester City. You're talking about billions of pounds on top of acquisition costs. And so it was never going to be a sale that you do looking for a return on investment. You're not going to get a return on investment in Manchester United, at least in the next decade, because it'll take you that long to build the stadium, to rebuild the staff, to build the infrastructure, to get your sports science and all that. So it has to be someone who has basically money to burn, and the interest is, I want to own Manchester United like I want to own the Mona Lisa. Your thoughts on this?
I agree, absolutely, and I think it's always hard to put a value to everything that comes with owning an asset like Manchester United. If it's talked about how if it's sports washing or so someone just opening doors in business situations and so forth, but it's absolutely not possible for anyone to buy the club with the purpose that Malcolm Glazer had when he bought it, as a passive investment almost, that would pay dividend and could carry the debt of the purchase price in a leverage buyout. I think if you do the math on that, it would cost approximately 500 million per year to pay interest on a loan to pay the purchase price, and the club could never carry that, since the club only have a revenue of approximately 600 million pounds. So it's absolutely impossible to buy the club at the figures mentioned to get the return on investment. So then whoever buys the club needs to see some other value. And one thing is, of course, that you can probably assume that when the club is sold the next time in 10 years or 20 years, the price will have gone up just like it has since Malcolm Glazer bought it. It was sold for 800 million to him, and I'm fairly certain that the value of football clubs will keep going up about the same rate as the economy as a whole. And that's one example is Chelsea, which have been bought by people with 100% financial purpose behind their investment. They want to make a profit on it, and they surely intend to make that profit when they sell the club.
Right, Chelsea will be up for sale in the next 5 years because
something like that. Yeah,
purely capital works. That's how private equity works.
Yeah.
I do think that, and we go to the Glazers' ownership. Rival fans always say, but they spent money. But it's what they don't realize is Manchester United, prior to the Glazers' ownership, was a self-sustaining football club that bought the best of British. They routinely broke transfer market records, and they did it without debt. What the Glazers have done, it's not so much that they haven't spent money, it's that they have nickeled and dimed where they didn't need to, whereby football decisions weren't being made based on what's best for the football team, but what's best for the balance sheet. And you see that, for example, in the match today, whereby the last three substitutions that Ten Hag had to make were Harry Maguire, Donny van de Beek, and Anthony Martial. At any other club, those three players would no longer be there because a football decision would have been made, if not this summer, in summers past, that these three were players that were not at the quality commensurate with a club looking to be in the top four consistently and potentially challenge for a title. But when the Glazers look at it, they look at three players who are assets on the balance sheet, and the cost of replacing them would be far more than the cost of keeping them. And this is where football decisions are not made based on the field prerequisites. And we can go through a litany of other issues. But talk us through where you think the two main bidders, both Ineos and the 9-2 Foundation, stand right now. We saw this week that Bloomberg put out a report that the Jim Ratcliffe's group, Ineos, are trying to restructure their bid. You, of course, have David Hellier in a podcast, I think last week, with Fabrizio Romano and someone else, mentioned that in his opinion, at the end of the day, he felt that the 9-2 Foundation would increase their bid and basically in the next month probably wrap up with the sale. Where do you see these two bids currently, and where do you think the path forward lies?
What's difficult with the 9-2 Foundation is that we know so little about what type of backing they have from the Qatari state, and I think it's a given that their offer, their bid for Manchester United is sanctioned by the state to some extent, but that doesn't mean that state is picking up the bill and will give
the losses.
Exactly, and will give the foundation 6 billion to buy the club for. It's a lot of money even for Qatar. I think it's a little bit more than 1% of their entire sovereign wealth fund, so it would be a very large investment. And the way 9-2 have conducted themselves, in lack of a better word, it doesn't really indicate that they have that type of backing. For example, it has taken a long time between bids for them to up their offer. And there have been reports that they have not been able to produce proof of funds, for example, and those type of things is normally it's a given. You must have proof of funds to even enter this type of discussions.
In the first part of the summer, I think Ben Jacobs mentioned that.
Yeah,
but I think those concerns were assuaged by the Bloomberg report, and then the Reuters report that Mr. Sen put out later. But you raise very valid concerns that the fans had, I'm sure the Rain Group had as well, going forward.
Exactly, and I think if at a point in time like we are today, when the oil is trading at almost $100 a barrel, Qatar is one of the very few financial players out there who actually is doing well right now. So they ought to have bigger resources than they could have imagined a year ago. And had they had the backing of the Qatar state, I would have assumed that they would just buy the club for the 6 billion that I think we can assume it would have would take to get the Glazers to sell. So but I don't think it's a given that they have that type of backing. Sheikh Yassim is wealthy in his own. He owns shares in the Islamic Qatari Bank worth almost 500 million, and his dad is a very famous businessman who has the nickname the man who bought London, because he managed Qatar's sovereign wealth fund for a long time, and were involved in deals when the fund acquired parts of Heathrow and other iconic locations in London. So I think it's possible to assume that they could raise a couple of billion, perhaps, between friends and family, and then receive debt backing from the Qatari Islamic Bank. And it wouldn't be the type of bank loans we are used to in the West, but they of course have similar debt structures in Islamic banking that follows Sharia laws. So instead of paying interest, you pay you give the bank a right to a part of the profit, so to speak, a set sum.
It would be a secured loan, basically, against the club and against future income from the club.
Yeah. And perhaps the backing from the Qatari state is more of the kind that they say that if you buy the club, we will support you and invest in infrastructure projects around Old Trafford and build a new train station and stuff like that, and which would enable Nine to recover a bit of their initial investment. So it's hard to know. If they have backing from the Qatari state, I would imagine that they would get it done fairly soon. If not, perhaps they don't have what it takes. I wouldn't rule out that they could go to 4.5 billion, but not higher. And Ineos is the type of business that can be tremendously profitable when it is doing well, but it's sensitive to the economy as a whole, and they were in trouble about 15 years ago. I think it was because it's an acquisition business. Ratcliffe is basically a fund manager himself, or at least analysis from the beginning, and he has bought up all these companies by using debt and step by step built up a very large business imperium, and that's I think it's clear that he has a couple of billions at least to put into an investment like this, and would finance the rest with debt. But if you look at the interest rates right now, so when he made his bid for Chelsea, which was 2.5 billion pounds up front, and then 1.75 billion in investments over 10 years, I think the interest rates perhaps were 2.5% or something like that, and yeah, and now it's 5-6%. So it's
and that's just your base rate. It's not the one
exactly.
The additional the bank will charge on top of your labor rate.
I'm not sure what they pay, but I wouldn't be surprised if they pay 8, 9, 10%.
Correct. Well, that's your floor. Your floor is what the Bank of England would set, or in the U.S. the Fed would set, and then of course any lending house would charge on top of what the floor is. And you make a good point that although Ineos is a petrochemical company, they do have a SPAC sort of a portfolio, which this would probably fold into Manchester United. If you had to make a prediction, where do you think this leads, and is there a timeline?
My best bet is that the Glazers right now will keep the club until they get an offer that is significantly better than what they have received so far. And I think they hope that if the economy turns up, and that could happen fairly fast, we in 6 months things could look a lot better. At which point I think they hope that someone will come in and be willing to pay them 3.5 billion or something around the number for their shares alone. And I think that would be a solution if that happens, and it could be next spring, for example. But you never know if the club struggles on the pitch, if the economy turns even worse. It could take longer, or it could force them to sell faster.
Do you think? So what you're suggesting is the Glazers basically almost play roulette with the economy and the performance on the club, while also understanding that they're basically broke if you look at their cash on hand for Manchester United.
I think we can assume that the Glazers themselves cannot contribute money to the club.
They can't, and and it's not a topic for today, but that's the reason why Manchester United were in some FFP, not bother, but they were under strict limits, is because the owners, the Glazers, basically don't contribute anything to Manchester United. Whereas if they did, your FFP purse strings would be loosened somewhat. I think it's fascinating to see what happens. I do think that as owners, they do have a fiduciary responsibility to do what's best for the club, but they haven't done it over 17 years. We shouldn't expect them to do anything now. I would say watch this space, because I think as fans we get frustrated, but as you know, M&As, they move slowly. It's like an oil tanker basically trying to turn around. And we'll see. I appreciate you coming on. Any last thoughts?
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here, and it was great discussing this with you. It's fascinating, and I think, like you say, I wouldn't rule out that something could happen short term, but I think unfortunately everything right now points towards that they haven't been able to strike a deal with the bidders, and I see no reason for things to change now compared to May or June. It's
correct. It's at an impasse, but I also understand the perspective of both Ineos and the 9-2 Foundation about not overpaying. They don't need to overpay. They have no one they have no third party to bid against. It's basically these two, and this is it. And now it's just up to the 6 siblings to decide whether they cash a check now or they take their chances in the future.
Yeah.
So and in the meantime, us as fans are left waiting.
Yeah. We are used to it.
Take care. Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you.